NTR Network. We are here with our friends of the show and contributors to the show to bring you the second season of The Crown. And we're kind of excited because we've got some casting news to talk about too. But before we get started, we wanted to play a small clip from the back end of season 1 that after Ashanti shared it with me and the group last week, I realized this was the moment that Elizabeth really became queen in her own right. And it kind of sets up how we see her acting in season 2. This is after Churchill had his stroke and they hid it from her. But, you know, you can't keep something hidden for long like that. And she comes to find out about it. And she lets the men have it. So here it is.
It has come to my attention that for a period of time last week, my Prime Minister was incapacitated. And the Foreign Secretary too. And that you colluded in keeping that information from me.
No,
it is not my job to govern, but it is my job to ensure proper governance. But how can I do that if my ministers lie and plot and hide the truth from me? You have prevented me from doing my duty. You have hampered and bamboozled the proper functioning of the Crown. How could you? My own late father valued you greatly. He believed the phrase, history teaches never trust a Cecil, deeply unfair. Perhaps not. You may go.
Prime Minister. Please.
The Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty.
Winston. I am just a young woman, starting out in public service. And I would never presume to give a man so much my senior, and who has given this country so much, a lecture. However, you were at my coronation.
I was.
And you therefore heard for yourself, as I took the solemn oath to govern the people of my realms according to their respective laws and customs. Now, one of those customs is that their elected Prime Minister should be of reasonably sound body and mind. Not an outrageous expectation, one would have thought.
No.
But it seems that you have not been of sound body and mind these past weeks. And that you chose to withhold that information from me. A decision which feels like a betrayal not just of the covenant of trust between us and the institutions that we both represent, but of our own personal relationship. In 1867, Walter Bagehot wrote, "There are two elements of the Constitution, the efficient and the dignified. The monarch is the dignified, and the government the efficient. These two institutions only work when they support each other, when they trust one another. Your actions, your breaking of that trust was irresponsible, and it might have had serious ramifications for the security of this country." Is your health better now?
It is.
Good. But is it sufficiently better? Fit for office better? I would ask you to consider your response in light of the respect that my rank and my office deserve, not that which my age and gender might suggest.
I look at you now, and I realize that the time is fast approaching for me to step down. Not because I'm unwell or unfit for office, but because you are ready. And therefore I have discharged my duty to your father.
I'm going to stop it there because I was like, tell him, Elizabeth, don't let what's between my legs confuse you. Sorry.
You know, Winston cried in the car.
Winston was crying when she got up to get her book. And I was like, see, she was taking her notes when she decided to get her learning. She's like, I remember it. I remember had y'all just taught me normally, but that's okay. I got my notes.
Right. Good old Walter.
Walter Bagehot, yeah. And she had everybody in the house looking for her old school books, too.
Yes, she did. I remember that. That was a great scene.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like
she keeps that right under her desk now.
And but it was like in that moment she became the queen that we now see in season 2, and that's why I wanted to play it, because I'm so glad you found that marker too, Ashanti. I was like, this is when she, after all these episodes, truly ascended to the throne.
Yeah.
So we pick up season 2 where season 1 left off. The end of season 1 left off where she sent, at her mother's suggestion, Philip on a 5-month tour to open the Olympic Games and to check out the territories because, like she said, you're lost in yourself, you're lost in your role. And when this season starts, they're hiding away on a boat at the end of that 5-month tour because of the shenanigans that took place on that tour. And then they do a time jump where we see what exactly was happening, like when he left, all that good stuff. And I'm just going to leave it there and talk to me, guys. What were your thoughts on season 2?
I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the first season. Okay. I definitely think that that's what sometimes happens. You have that sophomore slump. Mm-hmm. I felt it was just a bit too exaggerated, that they didn't need to rely on that story with Mike and his wife, Eileen, too much. It just too much time spent on that. But I really did enjoy the Margaret parts.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think the Parker storyline they could have done without, because you didn't need the relationship with his wife to show the strain that royal service has on people's families. You can kind of intuit that because they're always away. Like, it's the exact same stress that you see put between the Queen and Prince Philip. So anyone else that travels and works with them, you can guess that the strain in itself is probably difficult on regular families. But also, all we really needed from the Parker story was his connection to the supper club. I mean, to the Thursday club. And that, now that you said that, they didn't have to do that whole sexing thing. I kind of wish they hadn't done it.
I'm telling
you. You mean the sex scene with Margaret?
Yeah.
And Jackie Chan, who is a real person. Yes, that was.
Or calling her Jacqueline, damn it. We already established it.
but we got two Jacquelines in the story.
But everyone knows Jackie. Oh, I cannot call Jacqueline Chan Jackie Chan. It just feels wrong.
And every time you say Jackie Chan, I think of the martial artist.
And that's why we can't do it.
That's why we can't do it.
Okay.
Because that just brings up uncomfortable imagery.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I understand what they're going for, and it's going to be interesting. And we'll talk about that later when they now move into as they get older, because you have Helena Bonham Carter playing Margaret. Like, are they going to play that up even more? What they're going to do with that will be interesting. But as it stands, I get what they were trying to do, but I feel like they were kind of like, here we are in season 2. Let us hype this up a bit more. I mean, and going back to the Parker story, there was a book written, and I kept trying to find if there was any access to it. It seems like it's out of print, but Eileen Parker did write a book in the 80s about it, but there was not much that people could find. It was just that she said that she and her husband were kind of running around Buckingham Palace, but there was nothing else to substantiate if there was any cheating on Philip's part. So that part kind of made me think, well, if she wrote a book, what was it that could substantiate this? And I don't think there's anything that can be found so far.
Yeah, and about cheating, if there's been more rumor than actual facts surrounding whether or not Prince Philip cheated on the Queen. We don't know. No one's been able to prove anything, but that doesn't mean that he probably hasn't. It's just that people from the old school just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So it'll never be revealed if that was the case.
Yeah.
I agree. I tended to like moments of season 2 because there were some really intense moments of shade. And as I went on the record for season 1, I did like a lot of Tommy's shade. So I was happy to see him resurface in parts of season 2. I got tired of the whole episode of Charles at his prep school. But that's probably my feelings about some other stuff, but I don't think I needed a whole episode on that, but it tired me out. So I guess it was okay. I guess maybe I did like season 1 more than season 2, but parts of it were a little much for me. But I did like the intrigue with the Thursday Club and how stupid Michael was to write those letters. It was just stupid.
Yeah, it was. First rule of Fight Club.
Do you think... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just said first rule of Fight Club. I liked season 2. I feel like it fleshed out the other characters more. That said, it was easy for me to watch. I watched it all the way through and I enjoyed it. But if I had to compare, I agree. I like season 1 more. I think I'm more interested in Elizabeth's story than everybody else's. But I also understand that this is about the crown, which means all the people connected. And so this was our chance to get their stories. I would say if they could have gotten rid of an episode, they could have taken Charles's pieces and kind of interspliced it with Philip's pieces during his time at that school. We didn't need a whole Charles-centric episode.
But didn't they do that? I feel, no, I think you're right. Now that I said that, they did have that separate one about Philip.
And the Nazi background and his sister
exactly.
and stuff.
Yeah, they could have combined that. You're right.
They did that to connect it to the Edward and Wallace Nazi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's why that was there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I do think the Charles bit is important because there has been a lot of it in the news and during, throughout the years about Charles's experience, particularly more recently than when it was happening, obviously, and his experiences with school, because then in the future, potentially they can juxtapose that with the experiences of the younger princes and how they felt in school, because he allowed them to go to Eton. He allowed them, to have more of a softer landing, as it were, than to go to school as his father forced him to. But yeah, I could see how some of that could feel a little bit, delayed and dragged on.
Yeah, I agree. I knew that's why they were setting it up, but I felt like, and I did watch this season multiple times for numerous reasons, but it did just feel like, especially coming off of the episode before, which was that Marionettes, whatever episode it comes before, it succeeds. It
felt out of place. It felt out of place.
It
felt out of place, you think?
Yeah, it did. It took me way out of it. I think it was after the African episode where the Queen goes to
Ghana.
Yeah, but it took me out. And I adore Charles. Like I have a lot of feelings of empathy for him. Of course, I'm not a prince next in line for anything. But I was like, oh my gosh, y'all trying to make me hate Scotland, and I refuse to hate Scotland, but oh my gosh, can this just end? That was my feeling about that episode.
There's still Balmoral. There's still a lot for you to like, but
oh no, the Charles episode, Paterfamilias, came after the Dear Mrs. Kennedy episode.
Okay,
so that was the other thing. It was just in a weird place in the season.
Yeah, I can agree.
It was. It definitely was.
And also, I think it's kind of unfair to focus it on Charles when, Princess Anne is also right there. I think it would have provided more balance if they had intertwined both kids' experiences. Get more of an idea of how Princess Anne's growing up was significantly different from her brother's, because hers mirrored her mother's and sister and aunt. And as they grow up, it'll be interesting to see some of these seeds planted early with Princess Anne, because even still today, she's like the hardest working royal. She's always had like the most charities, like those charities that she patrons. She's done like the most trips in backwoods area, but people hardly pay attention to her because she's not glamorous like Diana. But it would be interesting to see what, seeing her mom go through, how she develops her sense of duty to her family and country, which I feel is completely absent because they're not focusing on her, which is unfair.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that is sort of my fear as the show progresses is, are they going to be able to give enough time to Anne to, again, compare that to Edward, their brother, and Andrew. But I have a feeling that they might just kind of maybe give them an episode or two as they did with Charles, and then kind of hone on the people that we tend to see in the public light a lot. And that would be a bit of a shame, because this could be the venue for us to get more insight.
And I feel it already that they're going to put the time that Princess Anne was almost kidnapped at gunpoint, going home to Buckingham Palace into one of these episodes, and no one's going to have any basis to understand how tough she is as a person, because remember, she's a daddy's girl. She was a tomboy, and she just ice grilled this guy that had a gun to her face as her security guards are being shot up, and she fought back. So it would be nice to have a little bit more of her growing up under mommy and daddy, to understand how that person comes out later.
It's possible that they'll go there, though. They're aging everybody up. We have Olivia Colman as Elizabeth. It looks like they confirmed Helena Bonham Carter as Margaret, and they're looking at Paul Bettany for Philip. And so it's possible that they'll go there, because the whole idea, I get what you're saying about ignoring the other children, but I also understand it. If the whole point of the show is to focus on the crown and the monarchy, Anne's not in line. So I could see that they're not going to spend a lot of time on her. It's not necessarily something I agree with, but I get why it's being kind of overlooked.
But we can give her something, because I think this show is also an opportunity to do some basic education about some people. And if you don't really remember that there are other children besides Charles, you will almost forget that Anne exists.
True. It's an opportunity, but it may not be the purpose of the showrunners.
I think you're right. Because people tend to forget Anne and Edward. They just solely focus on Charles and Andrew. But you're right. If they're not directly in succession, or they're several bits down, Like they
And
made
by
both
that argument,
though because of Fergie and all of that. So it might be the controversial bits.
then that argument would apply to Princess Margaret because she's not in line, but we still have a whole bunch of her in the show.
Yeah, because she was stepping in and helping out her sister during the early years, and that had an impact on Elizabeth's reign.
But as Elizabeth said, Margaret thinks she can be queen, the best. What did she tell Jackie? I have a sister who thinks she can do my job better. It would be the best queen of England or something like that.
I think so, yeah.
So one thing I did like about this season was how we see Elizabeth really carving out her own, right? And even though she's still being, or people are still trying to manipulate her, she's finding her way. And that really came through with the episode with her going to Ghana and how she dealt with Jackie O. I really enjoyed that interaction and that drama.
Okay, so the Jackie O episode bugged me because Jackie was a dick.
Oh yeah,
Jackie was a dick. It was one of those things.
Horrible.
She was horrible. My thing is this: you don't really know this woman. You really didn't take the time to get to know this woman, and you went home and talked mad shit.
Well, you
and I
felt so.
Let me
went to another part of her country to talk about her.
Right. I felt so bad for Elizabeth because she thought, here's another woman who's kind of in a similar situation as me, who's letting her guard down. Maybe I can let my guard down too. Woman to woman is someone in a similar position who might understand how difficult this is. That was messed up.
But you know what I thought was really messed up about the whole thing was how everyone was working to make Elizabeth feel like nothing in her own palace. Everyone making a big fuss over Jacqueline to the point that her husband is dying to sit next to her and doing all sorts of shenanigans and making her feel like the thickly ankled woman that Jack later refers to her as. That hurt my heart because I think I really understood that one of the reasons why Jackie was so petty is that when you feel small and insignificant, you look to make others feel small and insignificant. And she pretty much said that in her apology.
Yes. Again, some fact checking on that because that episode really did make me feel uncomfortable. The part about the drugs was true. They did have that doctor who was always giving them all these ridiculous concoctions to keep them, up and running, Jackie and President Kennedy. But the bit about how she felt about the Queen, I couldn't really find much information on that because they did spend time together, but it wasn't, something that was stated. Again, gossip is different these days than it is then. But I don't know. I kind of think they're playing on this part that became known about Jackie, about kind of her competition, particularly when it came, but that was more of her and her sister. There's this whole thing we could talk about Jacqueline Kennedy and her sister and how they fought against each other in different ways to vie for different men's attention. So I don't know if that's what they're tapping into. So I just didn't quite like the interaction because I couldn't really tell if it was accurate or played up.
That bit is partially right. The part about the drugging is right, but everything else regarding the Queen is a fabrication. It's an invention for the show.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I felt.
But I did love how everyone at Buckingham Palace, even Prince Philip, was so souped to see Jackie O. Like, they forgot the Queen was in the house. That's how excited they were. Mm-hmm. And I was like, so when the Obamas went to the UK, I wonder if everyone kind of responded the exact same way, because I could see it.
Yes and no, because, of course, Michelle, amazing, can't say enough good things. But Jackie had this very glamorous perception. So that was who she was everywhere. So I could see why they kind of wrote that into the story as well. Everyone was about her. Her every single move was analyzed, down to what purse, down to the shoe. She was like that person. So it could kind of make sense why everybody was excited to see her. I think it would be a different level with Michelle.
let's get, okay, so Ashanti sent us that article. Let's jump into it. The Edward episode.
Yeah.
The Windsor Files. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so the FBI also ran a file on Prince Edward. So the Nazi thing was substantiated by more than one country.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. But though that part is mostly more widely known about Wallace and Edward being sympathetic to, well, more than sympathetic to the Nazis, and the coup that would have sprung up had they won to get Edward back on the throne. People kind of use them as the big bad boogeymen. So, to the extent that a couple of years ago in 2015, a researcher was going through the archives of, the British, the royal family's like documents and stuff, and he came across tape of Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, baby Elizabeth, baby Margaret, and Edward VIII, and you see the Queen Mother and baby Elizabeth doing the Nazi salute.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that raises a whole lot of questions about how sympathetic the rest of the family was, because it seems like they put Wallace and Edward under the bus, and the Queen Mother was right there with them on the Nazi shit, when at the same time she's supporting her husband to keep England safe and whatnot. So it seems like a huge ass betrayal that no one is really making a whole lot of, like the Queen herself, like Cuban beat this footage.
And if that's true, then Edward's disdain towards the family makes more sense.
Yes.
Yes. It absolutely does, because they painted Elizabeth's father, mother, and the two kids as being like the perfect family, and the king especially showed. I can't speak. And though we're not clear whether or not he had Nazi sympathies as well, but it's a big deal that the Queen Mother would do a gesture like that on the brink of war, and there's no telling to what extent she might have known about the Holocaust at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still it's not fair.
It's not a good look.
And the footage is thought to have been in 1933-34, so it was still early on in the Reich. So this is when everyone thought that Nazis were not what they became. So it was just like. Go ahead.
Well, it was one of those things where, and I was reading that article, and it seemed like it was trying to soft pedal I get that the Nazis hadn't started just wilding out at that time. However, their ideas were problematic enough that you don't get to just yada, yada, yada that away.
Right.
Right. Especially when it comes to like the white ethno state stuff. Mm-hmm. So
exactly.
That was very much apparent, and also because they're Germanic. So that's another reason to side eye Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, because to support the Nazis because of her Germanic heritage is also playing into why it's really effed up that they pinned the Nazi tail on Edward's and Wallace's donkey asses.
Well, and mind you, they can Wallace and Edward can go kick rocks. They still are shit. But, however, no, I'm sorry, not even but. Wallace and Edward ain't shit. And from the looks of it, neither were Edward and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
Right.
Oh, George?
Okay, George. She
right.
was George at the time.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. And they try to paint it as Wallace was, and a lot of documentaries in history, I think, have gotten this wrong because they've tried to make Edward's allegiance to the Nazis tied to his love for Wallace. But that was not solely the case, right? I mean, it was not like she took him to the dark side on this issue. So, and I think
she was not the only bad person in this scenario.
Exactly. And The Crown continues that narrative because I think the UK and a lot of history is just more comfortable with that because Edward's already the bad guy, right?
Well, it goes back to, I forget what podcast we had. Oh, I know what podcast we had this conversation on. When I was on the Nerd Off with Rod and Karen and Shannon, we were talking about Doctor Who. And we were talking about the fact that so many people talk about England being this wonderful place and you should go there. And I'm like, y'all do know that England had the slave trade too. Y'all can't be sitting up here acting like they didn't actively participate and weren't a part of some of the heinous crimes. America wasn't going it alone. It's kind of the same thing with this. You can't pretend like your family didn't have these tendencies. You had some ain't shit folks. As much of a dick as Philip is and a racist is, he never denies the fact that his family was some Nazi assholes.
Right.
I'll give him that little bit of credit.
And his mother did well in the end. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Well, if doing well is becoming schizophrenic, I guess.
No, she helped.
But no, she actually helped. Jews escape Germany and stuff. Yeah, she was about that life, and because of her contributions to helping Jews during World War II, she's buried in Israel right now. And like, there's a handful of people that have been given that honor. Like, my dude from Schindler's List is also buried in Israel.
Oh, you can't bring
the
up
lives he saved.
You can't bring up Liam Neeson without me now remembering that stupid ass interview he just did talking about.
Yes, but it is a real person. Don't let that.
I know, but damn it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. And one more thing that I guess I can, or maybe it might be a couple of things. One, by the time war broke out, it's highly possible that the Queen Mother, if she had any recollections of like doing that, probably would have felt some type of awful, especially at the outset of, especially at the breakout of war, because war changes everything. Mm-hmm. And because I know she had access to, or she would at least have spoken to her husband about, state secrets and stuff. So I can extend a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for her complete allegiance to Nazis when war broke out, and it's her country now in danger for it. Mm-hmm. 2, I can see why she would be super resentful of Edward and Wallace, particularly Edward, because what he was doing was he was assisting the Nazis because he was sympathetic. Like, he had Hitler won the war, Edward VIII would be in her husband's place. I'm sure you understand what that would entail, or what that would mean to the Queen Mother's husband for that to happen. Mm-hmm. During all that time throughout the war, Edward was like Trump. He had access to secret, information and papers. Churchill had to stop that shit because he was giving away secrets to the Nazis. As I think they gave him some like stupid title. He became the Duke of Windsor, but he was given a couple of frontispiece jobs to do. So he was briefly in the south of France, and then he was fucking up there. So they sent him to Bermuda, and then he eventually came back to Britain after the war. But then they shipped him back off to the south of France because he was a security risk. And that's also probably why they shipped a whole lot of why they can excuse the Queen Mother, but continue to shit on him because he was the bigger threat to the family.
True. I get all that, but I won't lie. In 2018, I am weary of white women getting it right after they've gotten it wrong. I'm tired. Right. I'm exhausted of the excuses that they get to make and the absolution they receive. I just am. I hear everything you're saying. And yes, Edward was the bigger issue. But yeah.
But they can both be wrong.
Yeah.
Right, but
We both were.
And it's also how we study and tell history, right? I mean, there's so many schools of historical thought, and history is often the tale of who writes it the best, right? But I think white women often skate and continue to skate, and this is a chance for them to make that history and push it out in popular culture, at least through The Crown, in a way that clears everyone from dirt except for Wallace the hated and Edward the hated the more.
Yeah. But that was probably the most interesting, storyline. Like they could have rested some of the Charles plot and just focused on the Edward and Wallace bit, because then it kind of makes his relationship with Elizabeth, now she still reaches out to him for help. That, going back to, makes you side-eye white women, because you know the full extent, now that you've read the papers, of what he did during the war that essentially kept your family in clear and present danger. You're still reaching out to him. You can forgive him for that. Like, what's going on?
But so isn't that tied to her whole 1 minute or 1 hour fascination with Billy Graham? And
oh no, it's not a 1 minute, it's a lifetime. They had a relationship throughout their life. So, that's definitely.
Really?
Oh yes, and yes, they were friends for life. That's the part that.
Well, okay, so if you give
well, enlighten me, because this is new to me. I knew she was.
Yes. They were friends.
So
she really depended on. I'm sorry, we're both talking.
No, I was just saying. So speaking as a theologian, someone with a master's degree in divinity, if you give me an opportunity to speak in the Abbey or to preach in the Abbey, I'm going to be your bestie for life too, right? So let's just be real about that. But they really tried to shove that in way too much for me this season. Her whole role as a Christian, as she would say, and forgive
it matters
how
a lot.
big that.
I think she's important, because that is we talk about what we do and we do not know about her, but what has been documented is that is a true part of her. There's not an exaggeration there, and this is what she calls on when she's trying to make these various decisions. So, I mean, I've never been a fan of Billy Graham or his son. I'm proud to go publicly and say that his son and his race.
I don't know who these dudes even are. I didn't know these are real people.
Oh gosh, yeah, they're heavy in the They're heavy in the evangelical side.
You never turned on the TV and saw Billy Graham as a child? Under the guise of Christianity, racism for days, years. So it was.
Oh no!
Find that out. Yes, that this is a real relationship that she had with him, and for years and years, a true friend and sort of confidant, and when it came to religious issues. Yeah.
So I agree that it's a part of her life. I think where I'm responding to is how it came into the season. I don't know, maybe just for me, it felt a little forced.
It made sense. It actually
shout out to the Queen Mother and Prince Charles sitting up in church listening to him, like exasperated as all get out.
It actually made sense to me though that they brought him in, because at this point in time, she's struggling with her marriage. She's having children. She's still having to deal with her crazy ass sister, everything that's going on around her. And as her kingdom continues to diminish and diminish and diminish, and her role shifts and changes, she remembers that part of her role as head of the church. So if my role is shifting away more and more from ensuring proper governance, I also have this role as head of the church. I need to figure out what that means. So it actually made sense to me when they inserted it.
No, I agree. It made perfect sense. I don't think there was, because she's examining her role as a woman, as a wife, a queen, the monarch. Her role is in regards to the government as well. Again, you see shifts with the prime ministers. So it really, to me, it was a valid introduction of something that has been important throughout her life. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a part of her life. It just felt a little, I don't know. I don't know if shoehorn is what I wanted to say, but I like how she did continue to talk about how important forgiveness was to her. And she makes that very clear to Philip as they argue about whether she should meet with Edward again. And even talking with Edward, she brought that up again.
What did we think of Philip? What did we think of Philip this season compared to season 1?
I don't know. I probably have the least feeling, strangely enough. I know we're supposed to feel like the marriage was in turmoil, and I got it, but I wasn't. That was the least interesting part of the season for me, strangely enough. So I don't really know. I mean, Matt Smith is amazing as usual, but besides the one point I found interesting, that given his relationship with Uncle Mountbatten, it was quite striking that he still stood up and said, "No, my son is going to go to the school I want him to go to." So that was an interesting clash with him to still say, "This is my son." Basically, like, this isn't your son, this is my son, and what I say goes. I found that striking. Other than that, I'll leave it to everybody else.
I thought that scene was funny in the sense of he called Dickie someone who meddles and stuff, and that's what Dickie does. And I thought, but isn't that how you got to where you are? Dickie's meddling.
At the same time, he didn't get to where he wanted to be through Dickie's meddling, and I think there's a slight bit of resentment because of it.
Right. But Philip gave me one moment of pure comedy this season, and I think it's when they're on the train to Balmoral, and he made that comment about her hair, that if your intention is to have more children,
that was rude as fuck. That was so goddamn rude.
It was rude, but I'm sorry. I chuckled to myself because I don't know why he didn't have tea over his face after he finished. He sure enough said it and leaned back in the chair like, now what?
Because at the same, you know what it was? This season, he bugged me more than first season just because he's doing all this shit. And by the end of the season, she's like, look, you ain't going to leave me because you don't want to lose everything you gain by being with me. I can't leave you because, hello, head of the church. So if you're going to do it, just be responsible so I don't have to clean up your mess. And he was like, but and his whole thing was, I want you to be effective. It's like, you small grown child. What the hell is wrong with you? She is showing in the way that she can that she's committed to you. She made you a fucking prince because of your little temper tantrum and acting out. You go on a 5-month trip, embarrass me, and come back. I'm not making you a prince. I'm hiding you in the nearest dungeon for the next 2 decades. Coming out long enough to give me a couple of more heirs. That's it. He made me so mad this season.
I guess I found a lot more about his character. As we know, I think I went on record, not a big fan of him during season 1, but the whole feeling about the whole episode with him and Charles, whatever anger I had towards him just increased, especially during the plane ride and there's turbulence and he's the picture of the worst father ever. just, But I don't even know how the actress didn't slap him because she smiled. But I was like, he just told you your hair is horrible and he's never going to touch you. And you smile. He would have been wearing tea. He would have been wearing tea with the quickness.
But I was rewatching, shall I say, and how many times I've seen this documentary where they talk about Victoria and Albert. And yesterday, and I messaged you guys to tell you that it struck me yesterday, the umpteenth time watching it, that Philip did have some really interesting links with Albert. His approach to modernizing the crown in some ways, also his approach, I think, with the kind of father that he wanted to be. And you touched upon that earlier.
He was the ultimate house husband.
Yes. So there are some interesting points to Philip that I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit more. And again, I also hope they talk about the other things of his continuously, ridiculously ludicrous racist statements and, offensive talk. But it would be interesting to delve into him where he's a man instead of a man-child complaining about things,
Maybe we'll get that in the next season as they age him up.
Look forward to that, hopefully.
I want to see Prince Philip interacting with Meghan Markle.
I do too. But can we just go back a step? Some of the homophobic comments that he made this season just made my teeth itch. And maybe they're not homophobic. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic.
No, you're really not. You're really not. They were.
Yes, you're right.
It really just made my teeth itch. And like I said, I didn't like him anyway, but I understood more about who he is. And I think I don't know. I feel like this season reminded me that everybody is really complicated. And at the end of the day, a lot of these people are just trying to do the best they can with what they can. But I was muted earlier, and I wanted to say one more thing about Jackie's visit to the palace. What really bothered me was how ecstatic Margaret was to spill the tea and be catty.
Mm-hmm.
That just really bothered me, because wasn't she dating at the time or married, or
she hadn't gotten married yet? Because didn't Elizabeth have her hold off on at least announcing her marriage because of the rule that if there's a royal to be born, you have to wait. Right.
But she's dating. Well, I don't know. It just made me feel really awful that this information is going to hurt your sister. And I don't even know if that was historical or not. So I can't say, that real life Elizabeth and Margaret had this conversation, but it hurt me to see Margaret so giddy.
It really was, because at some point it's like, okay, I may resent you because of Peter and blah, 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 but you're still my sister. And at some point I have to grow up and recognize this was the role that was handed to you and you're playing it. I get it. Instead, it just, the way they're portraying it is that Margaret is just holding this grudge, and any little thing that brings Elizabeth misery brings her joy. And it's really kind of disgusting to watch in the show.
It did. I agree. I actually, to be very honest, I cried a little bit at that, because she was so, she was just too willing, like, ooh, I just can't wait to spoil your spirit, because I know you like Jackie. So here's something to just make you feel horrible. And then walked away. I was like, oh, Margaret, if I meet you in the back alley, I don't believe in violence against women, but I'm going to find a woman to get violent with you.
So I guess this is our segue to talk about Margaret.
Let's go.
Because, whoo, baby. She was a glorious train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The only thing I liked about her were her dresses. Her fashion was gorgeous. I want every single dress that she wore.
She was mildly sympathetic season 1. Season 2, I was just like, if you miserable, so be it.
Nah, bro. Like, I was so mad. Like, when the queen was like, I can't remember if it was like Andrew or Edward, but she had just given birth, and Margaret comes in and barely was like, so how you feeling? Before just jumping into her own shit.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one here who I don't want to say like I am a fan, not even close, but I like the character. I really do like the character. I think there's a lot to play with there, and maybe that is why they tend to hype up her cattiness. But I think she's a complex character. I really, really do.
I agree that she's complex, and I find myself in moments liking her, in moments understanding that hunger to be loved and to be seen, and then the next moment wanting to just get Margaret alone and have my mother whoop her because you're doing way too much. So I did feel like I felt like that about a lot of the characters this season. And I think it goes back to my statement. I think a lot of people are just doing what they can to make it through this really glorious but just draining experience.
Yes. Like the worst I think was when I think it was the Mystery Man show, and everybody's looking at the picture, and everybody knows it's Philip, and she just who's like, I know I'm not the only one that knows that's Philip, right? I'm just like, Margaret, Jesus Christ, come on, have a little bit of tact.
Or just even when they show him at the Arctic and he has the beard, and Margaret's like, he looked well, and I was like, the man's children are in the room, girls. Is it that deep? Like, really? Yeah. But at the same time, she would do something later on and I would just laugh and say, oh, Margaret. So I don't know. I'm probably not the best for that, but she wore me out. She just, and what do we think about the husband?
Anthony?
Anthony
who got a cuck baby out there?
Yes.
I don't know. Is a threesome technically true. A cuck baby? I don't know. I don't even know that I'm using that term.
I will not use that terminology, but
I don't even know that I'm using that word right. So maybe I should stop using it.
Well, if you're using it properly, it wouldn't be him. It would be the other man who was married.
So I wasn't using it right. See, I'm gonna stay in my lane over here.
So that's why we don't.
but also, I just think the term is very. I don't know.
It's a mess. It's a mess.
Right. But yes, that he had the child. That was true. They later found out that was his child, the one that the friend when they had the affair during the marriage, all of that.
Oh, it wasn't an affair though. It was a threesome, right?
Well, they were all participating. That's what I never found. Well, potentially. Let's go with
that's for the show,
right? Well, okay, so we'll say we're talking right now. Right now we're just talking in show. In show, everyone knew that everyone was having sex with each other.
Yes. I don't know if Margaret knew the extent.
No, I'm talking about the husband, wife, and Anthony. I'm not talking about Margaret.
They all knew. That was the thing. That was the three. Yes, for the show, that was definitely happening. Yes.
So, but what I did find compelling about the Anthony character was his desire to, at some point, have his mother see him. And although she never expressed love towards him, because when he said, maybe now you'll love me, she said, oh, Anthony, are you doing this for me? And I was like, yes. Don't we all know that?
But that annoyed me because, okay, it could be true. That part I wasn't able to find out for sure. But really, you're a
grown-ass man.
Come on now. It was just too much. So now I'm supposed to feel sad for you because your mother was never really the greatest to you. And she got remarried, blah, blah, blah. Come on. I'm sorry. You're an adult. What are we doing here? So
it worked for me, though. It worked for me. It worked for me 1,000%. It worked. I said, oh, but it didn't last long. Like 30 seconds. But they got me.
That was good. Then it was well executed because that was what they clearly were.
If they were trying to reach the one Negro in the state of Georgia, they metric succeeded. Cha-ching! You got it. For 30 seconds, I completely felt for him. But can I be petty? So this is just me being petty. I kept wondering how the character playing Anthony, Matthew Good, is getting all this range and love, because I find him the most boring of humans in the world.
Because he's dismissive, and during that time where people, that's part of the reason she fell for him. So she said it. She's like, you show no deference as you should. For some reason, during that time, the lack of deference, the lack of fucks to give was apparently attractive in a world where men were tripping hand over foot to woo women. That's the assumption I got from the way it all presented.
So
I'm not saying it's smart. I'm not saying it's smart or right. I'm just saying the way they filmed it made it seem like that was why he was such a draw to her and all these other women that were just like, because even when old girl said, yeah, I'm pregnant and I don't know which one of you it is. He's like, go have fun with your husband. That's y'all's baby.
That was cold.
It was cold, but it made sense. I mean, he's not married to her and he had no interest in having a baby with her because No. So I'm not saying he's right. It's dirty as hell, but it's who they painted him to be.
Yeah, well, I'm interested because there's been documentation or it's been discussed that he actually had a really good relationship with Queen Elizabeth. So because he passed recently, but that they did have a good relationship. So it would be interesting that this kind of person can have a good relationship with his sister-in-law, the Queen. So I'm just interested in what kind of part of his personality, was drawn upon to create that relationship with her.
And if that's what ultimately drove Margaret to say, okay, I'm bored with you now.
But they were both cheating. That is something that's not a spoiler alert at all.
I know, but at one point they got, we can wait for the show and do the research. I'm just saying, Margaret wants what she wants, but as the show is portraying, she also glories in Elizabeth's misery. So for Elizabeth to make a friend, I could see in show Margaret becoming very quickly bored with Anthony as a result. Like, oh, you were mine, but now this, so never mind. So I don't know. We'll see what happens when they age it up, if they revisit it at all.
That makes sense.
Now, during our last episode, you guys have started to talk a little bit about the Windrush generation. That's obviously not something they touched on in season 2, but do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how it might impact what we see in like season 3?
Well, for that, actually, before we get to that, what did we think about the Ghana episode, which is just Jackie, but the Nkrumah, because that really did happen. And she went and she danced with him. And that man, if we know anything about Ghanaian history, amazing what he did for the country. So what did we think?
I liked it. It was so, and it's so funny given current Russian Western relationships right now, and suspected interference in a lot of Western democracies, elections and such like that. It was so interesting that she went over there to solidify the crown's relationship with them when the East and the West were at odds and trying to court and arm and woo, and he was just like colonial. Nope. I liked that episode. I did.
I also, my sister, loved that episode because this was a time that Elizabeth said, the crown is on my head. Men, step back. Let me show you I'm not stupid. I've been reading Wardrobe Badgett in my private time.
I got me some learning.
And I have ideas. Let me show you what I can do. And I loved it. I was clapping. And I've watched that episode several times, and I just clap because she shows you, listen, everyone has low expectations of me. And I know it because y'all tell me every day of my life. But let me show you. I can do some things too. And I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
It was true. But it was interesting because I also think she learned from the whole Nasser situation in Egypt, and although she couldn't really do much, and that was really on the prime minister, and then we saw that he went out, and then we had a new prime minister. That basically she finally got to put her foot in a bit of the colonial issues. That a lot of it was political, but part of it was also that soft power and that, charm offensive. So, did it work? Yes and no, but it was a good show for Elizabeth.
I think the government went for a layup and she dunked it.
Mm-hmm.
If I got my basketball metaphors right.
It sounds good to me. And if y'all listening and it's wrong, shut up. We don't care. We're going to go with it.
Right.
Yeah. I just like how rude Kwame Nkrumah was. Like, he was so rude. He was so disrespectful. And I was like, okay, I wonder how much of that part was true. Because he came off like a dick.
He really did.
I think he came off as someone. I don't think that was rude. I think he handled the situation properly. Maybe I'm being an Africanist.
Are we talking about Philip?
Appropriate.
Are we talking about Philip or someone else?
We're talking about Kwame Nkrumah.
Oh, no, I thought he was great. No, I thought he was.
He welcomed her.
No, given how Western countries just was jacking resources, especially from African nations, I thought he was 100% justified in how he approached it.
Absolutely.
And that actor, I love him. He is so... Danny Sapani is the actor who played him.
He's actually Ghanaian, or he has Ghanaian roots in real life, too.
Mm-hmm. He is... I've seen him in so much stuff. He is awesome. They picked a really good character actor for that one.
Yeah, I found nothing inappropriate in that. And it's perfect.
It was great. It was one of my favorite episodes of the season.
Well, I guess if anything, it proved that no matter how disrespected the queen is, she can hold her chin up through it and flip it to her advantage in some kind of way. And on that note, you want to talk about homie who got his face smashed in for talking bad about the queen, Lord Abernathy or something or another.
Yes. That's a huge bit. That is a huge part there. Even the Windrush is minor compared to that for this part, season 2. So he was great.
Let's talk about that because the end title credited him with helping push the monarchy forward.
He did.
I appreciated her willingness to listen, and I get what she was doing. Like I feel like a lot of people watch the episode and was like, oh, she's just so stuck in tradition. I don't think that was it. I think she was shrewd enough to know that she couldn't just do everything he said, because as many people, modern people who would enjoy it, there were the people that she had to answer to, i.e. the government, and some traditionalists that would push back against it. So she found the balance. I loved his approach, and I loved that she listened as much as she could and found the balance. Okay, we can do this, but we probably won't do this. Let's meet in the middle.
And I love that he loved the institution.
Mm-hmm.
And he just wanted to make it better.
Exactly.
And I loved how he brought that out and how but if we could even, in that episode, if we could just even go back to, was it Martin who told them, y'all are heading down the wrong road with the speech.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I saw was how if you don't listen to the people around you, you're going to make some mistakes. And he'd been trying to warn people, and eventually his voice got heard. And at the time, there are other episodes where people are not listening to Elizabeth, but she makes the decision that she makes, and it's a good decision. And I just really thought that it shows how even through love and respect, you can make changes to an institution.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But let's unpick that. So Martin remember from first season, she really wanted Martin to be her personal secretary, but Tommy was not keen on that at all. So that's why she got the personal secretary she got. And then Martin, we find out in history that he ended up being her personal secretary. So it all goes back to Tommy, that Tommy was sort of stuck in a certain way and he wanted her to proceed like that. So then Martin gets ignored. Tommy intervenes again and agrees with the personal secretary. And that's why she went ahead with the speech. So if anyone is to be blamed, it's Tommy.
Because that speech was trash.
On everyone who disagreed with him. And you're right. But Tommy can shade you into agreements. Because...
So can we talk about how Tommy was annoyed as all get out when the Queen visited him at home, and he had his big old soldier set out, his play set, and then she picked up a soldier and put it down in the wrong spot, and he went behind her back, and put it back where it's supposed to be. Yes. I was like, ooh.
And he was shady,
he rolled his eyes so bad.
He rolled his eyes. And she was trying to get some stuff right. And he was like, could you just tell me what you want?
Oh, Tommy. That's what Tommy needed to decide, though. You want to be left alone, but you still want to be up in the palace. You got to make up your mind here, Tommy. So
that time she went to him and kind of felt bad disturbing him in his retirement.
I didn't think so. He deserved that after he'd already, because you're right, she did go to him, but I feel like he'd already made an appearance in the palace before then, which was an indication that he, he was okay with consulting, as it were, in his retirement.
Yeah, because every time there was a mistake, the secretary was calling Tommy.
There were a few times, though, didn't Tommy pick up the phone and dig his nosy nose in it? Like, you need some help? You retired. Yeah. Go be retired, mustache.
Tommy don't have no friends. There is no Mrs. Tommy. There is no little Tommies. Don't nobody like Tommy but Ty.
Tommy had his family. He just was really dedicated.
Tommy's family was on vacation permanently. They just wait for the checks. They don't want to deal with him.
But yes, I will say, if anyone did any research into Lord Altrincham, I'm trying to pronounce it properly, he ended up giving up his title and going by his name, John Grigg. So his brother took it over, but he was very anti-apartheid. He was really about that life. Like, he practiced what he preached. So I found him to be compelling.
He wanted women clerics.
Yes.
That was that's my brother. He was like, can we make this thing happen? And the people were like, ooh, toffee. Yeah.
So he did well. I did think it was funny at the end of the episode, though, how the Queen Mother, when they were getting ready to meet these, ordinary people, she's like, okay, he's a plumber, he's a store owner, she's a clerk. Like, they were, trying to come to grips with it, and then they put on their gloves for battle and then went to go meet, their public visitors.
Well, the Queen Mother seemed kind of dickish about it. Like, Elizabeth seemed okay with it, but the Queen Mother was just like, do I have to? It's like, no, you don't. Go to Balmoral. Go to your castle in Scotland.
Well, she was just, and there's no reason why we hold on to protocol and curtsies, because that's all we have. We went from reigning to ruling. I was like, can we have some perspective?
Can you get over yourself? Can you get over yourself, Miss? I'm going to teach my toddler a Nazi salute. Can you get over yourself, please?
Bring it back. Bring it back.
Right, bring it back.
I'm sorry.
Woohoo, you're going to bring it back. Yes. Oh, quick question about Margaret, because, this is a debate I was having. Do you think it was accurate that she quickly decided to marry because she heard that Peter was going to get married? Do you think that really was part of it? And if Peter wasn't getting married, she would have just kept on dating photographer Boo and just kept that going without marriage?
I think she really wanted to be married. I think in a place she couldn't really admit to herself, and I'm just talking in show, she wanted a family, she wanted a husband. As imperfect as their relationship was, Philip did love and does love Elizabeth in his own way. He's devoted to her and their children. He can't keep his dick in his pants, but he loves his wife. And I think along with everything else she, envies Elizabeth for, she also envies her for that and wants that for herself. But I think Peter getting married to a woman who was a teenager and looked like her probably was also a part of it. Because her whole thing's like, he was supposed to wait and he didn't wait and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that definitely was it. I think it is quite suspicious, shall we say, in the timing of it all.
And just a heads up, Ty had to head out, so we're gonna wrap it up without. We're gonna have to wrap up without him. So sorry, Ty, we went over, but that's okay. We're having a good talk. Ashanda, what did you think?
Anything you wanted to bring up?
I think that was it. I'm glad we got to Lord Altrincham and Kwame Nkrumah. Yep, I actually do think. So I think I've been waffling between which season is the better season. I think I like them both equally. Okay. Because they address slightly different things with different points. Because as history changes, of course, so does your perspective. Mm-hmm. So I like seeing how these characters evolve from one decade to the next, and it's not the same because it never is. Mm-hmm. So I think I've gotten to a point where I like them both equally. People annoy me. And that's consistent between seasons. But overall, I think it's pretty strong. I'm excited for season 3.
Me too.
Yesterday, we were talking about Paul Bettany, that they believe he's in talks now to be Philip, which I think would be a really good choice.
Mm-hmm.
They've confirmed Olivia Colman, confirmed Helena Bonham Carter. It'd be interesting to see who they have for Charles, and if they're, well, it depends on how far they go age-wise with Andrew and Edward. But there was something I thought about that I was going to mention. Did you all catch when Elizabeth gave birth?
Both times.
What they did to her?
Okay, so the first time they knocked her completely out, and I'm like, wait, they're doing a C-section in the palace? I was like, no, they're pulling her out. Wait, they're pulling the baby out while she's knocked out. I'm like, they didn't tell me that was an option when I gave birth.
Thank God it isn't.
Yeah, I thought she was awake for Andrew, but it was Edward. She was just gone, lights out.
Yeah, so she was awake with
Andrew was when Princess Margaret came out and was a dick to her in her, recovery.
So the last baby, she was awake for, no drugs, no nothing, and Philip was in the room. The baby, so that was Andrew. The baby before, so that was Edward. They knocked her all the way out. He was out playing racquetball or something, and they used forceps and pulled the baby out. I'm like,
isn't Edward younger? Edward is
the youngest.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I flipped it. So Andrew was when she was knocked out and they used the forceps, and Edward was when she was awake and Philip was present.
I thought it was the reverse.
The third, no. The third baby, she was knocked out for. The fourth,
and heaving and sweating and whatnot.
That was the fourth baby. And the third baby, she was knocked out for.
Man, I would have been knocked out for the last one too. If that's the.
They weren't. I think by then, I was surprised with the timing, because they did used to offer that Twilight. Not getting the name correct, but Twilight something, where they completely knocked you out. And then they started recognizing, oh no, it's not quite safe to have a woman completely knocked out when she's having a child.
Yeah, because you kind of need her to push.
Right. So it's so they realized that was not something to do. So that is probably why with Edward that was not an option. But that whole Perfumo one in that scandal in the last episode where she also gives birth, I've learned about that throughout the years. This is the first time, and again, it's probably done for creative purposes, that Philip was even remotely associated with it. There was never any kind of...
Yeah, there's no concrete evidence that he was involved in the Perfumo affair, but the writer kind of... He took some licenses there.
Oh, he took some licenses.
All these people know each other in some way or another. It's plausible that he would have been caught up, at least, with someone who was involved. But yeah, there's no actual proof.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So again, I mean, I know what they were doing with it, but that's a whole interesting case in itself. But I got what they did with it. And it was a time so they could kind of tie up everything from the season for Elizabeth and Philip to get on the same page. Because I'm sure you remember, I was just like, what? When Uncle Mountbatten told her that basically, there are certain times where you marry certain people and certain people are going to do what they want to do. So Uncle Mountbatten's wife was out here in these streets, and he was basically saying that, potentially Philip was that same kind of personality. So if to wrap it up in the end as a thing that Elizabeth to just say, look, I'll look the other way, and for Philip to say, no, I don't want you to. I think that was a nice kind of, tie.
No, she gave him an ultimatum. Like, that's how the first episode begins. It's like, are you in this or are you not?
Right, but by the end, she told him that she would look the other way, and he said, no, I don't want you to do that.
Was there any sexual innuendo that I missed this season? Because I'm still baffled that I missed
No, there was nothing innuendos about it.
Last season.
Nah, not really. Not really, but I'm sure you'll find it. Oh, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, well, I want to shout out Ty, a friend of the show, for joining us. Asia Rowe, contributor over at Project Fandom, Ashanti. We pushed the first one out on the free feed. I think we're going to chat about just keeping this on the free feed just because this is a good show. We want everybody to hear this. Anyway, you can find us online at mtrnetwork.net. All our shows, our articles, con coverage is there. We're on Twitter at the MTR Network. We'll have our Twitter handles in the show notes. And until next time, take care. Say goodbye, everyone.